All right, welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. I'm Jon Galloway. I'm a PM on the DevDiv community team. We've got Dan Roth back on. Everyone knows Dan. And a lot of you may know, but some might not. Marc, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm working on the distributed systems team, which most people probably think of more as the ASP.NET team. Working on various parts of .NET, performance related, caching related, things like that. And in my wider set of things, I also look after a bunch of things like some of the Redis clients for .NET and Dapper and things like that. So that all ties in really very closely with all the kind of the caching side of things. So it's all
awesome. Okay, well, Dan's got some amazing links for us, so I will pop those on the screen.
Yeah, I get to do the community links this time. I get to play Jon. Yeah, we've had some fun stuff that's happened recently. The first .NET 10 preview is now available for people to download and try out. This is the first preview release of our next .NET long-term support release, which is expected to ship probably in November, later this year. You can expect previews about once a month over the upcoming months. So there's a blog post. You can take a look at it and look through all the new functionality that's in the libraries, the runtime, the SDK. Here's all the new ASP.NET Core and Blazor related features. We've talked about a bunch of these in our planning discussions on the community stand-up. So some of these should sound familiar, like the new OpenAPI 3.1 support. That's now available for you to try out in preview, the YAML support, and a bunch of other things, some nice Blazor improvements, like we made some improvements to QuickGrid. Made the Blazor script available now as a static web asset, so it can be also compressed and cached along with the rest of your static web assets. Whole bunch of good stuff. There was actually a unboxing live event that happened on the same day as the release. So if you want to see some of these features, it's not all of them, but like a sampling of these features shown live, go and check that out, and you can see some previews of those. In the upcoming ASP.NET Core community stand-ups, we'll also be going deeper into each of these new features so that we can get that deep feedback from you all. So .NET 10 Preview 1 is available. Download it, try it out. It's pretty cool. Also, on the same date, in case you missed it, .NET Aspire 9.1 also shipped. If you're an ASP.NET Core web developer, Aspire is an awesome set of developer tools and libraries and patterns that really help make building distributed apps with .NET easier and more productive, easier to monitor them, have them be observable. It's a really awesome dashboard that goes along with it. Lots of great new features that shipped with .NET Aspire 9.1. Check that out. There was a whole community stand-up last week where they did like a release party that showed the new features. You can watch that live stream and get all the details. So if you're using .NET Aspire, time to upgrade. If you're not using .NET Aspire, you should give it a try. Add it to your existing ASP.NET Core projects. You don't need to rewrite anything. You can just add it to your existing projects and start reaping the benefits.
One tiny thing I'll mention here, Dan, is I've been updating my Aspire apps to 9.1, and in Visual Studio, right-click, upgrade, and then it has a thing for upgrade Aspire version. Perfect. Like I've had no changes. I mean, so anyways, highly recommend, like if you're putting it off and you're like, oh, that's going to be hard. Like it's taking me seconds to update my, so if you're on, especially if you're on Aspire 9.1 or 9.0, get on 9.1. Like you'll get this amazing dashboard, lots of other great features. It's a no-brainer.
So. Cool. I didn't know about that. Yeah. So built-in upgrade experience too. That's cool. Okay. When we shipped the first preview of .NET 10, we also started publishing our roadmaps for the .NET 10 release. So the roadmap for ASP.NET Core in .NET 10 is now published and available. You can reach it at aka.ms/ASP.NET/roadmap. That will take you right here to this GitHub issue. That's sort of a permanent link that always links to the latest roadmap for our ASP.NET Core plans. Now this is the list of all the features and enhancements that we plan to do in this release, in APIs and Kestrel and auth and identity and for Blazor and Web UI. So you can take a look and get a feel for what to expect in this release. Of course, plans change. Things may take longer than we expect, or there may be other disruptions that just happen to our plans where we have to adjust this. So we do try to keep the roadmap up to date as things maybe get dropped off or pushed out of the release, or maybe even get added. So, check back regularly to see what's here. This is our best understanding of what we expect to do, subject to change, of course. It's also not a complete list of every single issue that we're expecting to handle in the release. It's mostly focused on, epics or high-level features and enhancements. There'll, of course, be a bunch of bug fixes that also happen, and we don't list every single one of those here. You can find those in our issue tracker. Oh, and I guess I should point out that if you want to discuss the roadmap, if you have feedback on the roadmap, we do lock the roadmap issue just so that we don't get a bunch of chatter on the GitHub issue itself. But there is a GitHub discussion that we set up. There's a link right here. I'll open that up, where this is where you can then, comment or post questions about the roadmap and engage with the team through the GitHub discussion. All right. A couple things that I wanted to also highlight about progress that we're making against that roadmap. As we start working on these different features, the devs will and the PMs will start figuring out, okay, what are the exact scenarios that we want to target, what are the requirements, what does the API shape start to look like, and start writing down all those design notes into the GitHub issues so that people in the community like you can take a look at it and give feedback and see if we're heading in the right direction, or if you think we need to maybe take into account some other things. A couple that I wanted to point out for Blazor, we have a big effort that we're doing in .NET 10 to address persisting the state of your components when you're using interactive server rendering, when you're using Blazor Server. Today, Blazor Server is really convenient as a programming model. It's a stateful programming model, but all that state is just held in memory. So if anything happens to that memory, then the user's app state goes away, and it's basically an exercise to you as a developer to figure out how to deal with that, how you might want to save that state and reload it. In 10, we're trying to create a more complete story around handling that server state and having a persistence model around that. Javier is the main dev leading that effort, and he's written a big set of design notes about his current thinking about how this is going to work and how we're going to get all the different scenarios supported. If this is an area that's interesting to you, please take a look, read through it, comment, let us know what you think. Let us know if there's other scenarios or requirements that you think we should take into account, or if you have other ideas on how to improve the design. That's one. The first part of this broad epic is to introduce a declarative programming model for state persistence in Blazor, where you can use have attributes on some properties in your component to say hey, this property should be persisted. Javier has been starting to work on this as well. One thing that I thought was really cool was a member of the community, this gentleman down here, Yuri Durov, posted a comment saying, hey, he's done something similar to this in this Blazor state project, which I hadn't heard of before. So we took a look at that recently, and it's pretty cool. It does a lot of the similar things to what we're hoping to accomplish in the framework in .NET 10, but are available for you to use on .NET 9 or on .NET 8. And this org, this BitsArt org, has a whole bunch of other interesting Blazor-related projects that I thought people might be interested in, like Blazor Roth, Blazor Cookies, Blazor State, and some other .NET-related stuff. So some cool stuff from the community that if you're interested in Blazor or interested in some of these other areas, take a look at what they're doing. Yuri, and I think there's another gentleman that's also involved with this, Vladimir. Thank you for engaging with us on the corresponding GitHub issues. We hope to hear more from you and your thoughts on how we can make state persistence in Blazor and .NET 10 really, really great. Awesome. The other one besides state persistence that I wanted to highlight is Safia's work on validation for minimal APIs. Safia is working on a generic programming model for validating object graphs. This is something that we want for minimal API validation, but we also have wanted for a long time in Blazor. Some of you may be familiar with, a while back, we shipped some preview components for Blazor for doing object graph validation, but we never actually really shipped a stable version of those packages. Part of the reason for that was that we didn't want the object graph validation logic to be Blazor specific. We really felt like it should be something that's more like in the core .NET libraries alongside like the other data annotations logic. And we weren't able to quite land that at the time. So it kind of hasn't really moved anywhere in a while. And we know a lot of people would really like us to do something here. The plan is that the work that Safia is doing for minimal APIs, that it will also be used in Blazor, and we'll get that object graph functionality through that same logic. And hopefully we'll be able to move it down into the core libraries and make it available to anyone who wants an object graph validation feature. So take a look at Safia's notes if you're interested in the validation space. Maybe you have worked on validation libraries in the past, or had to address this problem yourself. We'd love to hear your thoughts on whether what Safia is proposing here will work for you. Any questions about that, John, before we move on from the chat? I haven't been watching it.
Not super specific there. There's some just kind of general, and I can answer some of them about using Aspire dashboard in production, some stuff like that.
Well, we'll post these links as part of the live stream later. So if you want to go engage on these GitHub issues, you'll at least know where they're at, and you can read through the design notes.
Awesome. Okay. I guess with that, we can pop over to Mark then, huh? So Mark, okay, we've got your screen ready to go.
All right. So yeah, I'm going to talk about, so one of the new things that's coming up is, and that we're kind of releasing at the moment, is HybridCache, which was meant to be released with .NET 9, but it kind of got delayed a little bit. So kind of using this session to kind of talk about updates on that and kind of future on that. If you saw the unboxing that John and Dan mentioned, then we covered some of that in here, but hopefully we should be able to, so some of this will be kind of a duplicate, but we should also be able to cover things in a bit more depth and a lot more things that are coming up, just to show that it's not a kind of a one and done thing. There's a kind of ongoing investment in this area. So yeah, HybridCache. There's some links here. I'm sure I can get those to John later, but they're the usual MS Learning docs and just the GitHub repo and the NuGet package that are relevant. And again, most of this is all just linked in the docs pages anyway. So HybridCache. What is coming up? So the big update at the moment is that we're finally GA. Like I say, this was meant to be, well, no, we will be GA in a few days.
Feature complete.
Yeah. So we were feature complete in the 9.2 release of .NET Extensions, which was in February 2025. Which that added the missing tags feature, which was why we didn't release along with .NET 9. It's quite a nuanced and tricky feature because of how we tried to squeeze it in, which I'll cover in a bit. But everything is now ready to go. So there should be a non-preview release of that in the 9.30 release, which so the .NET extension stuff aims to ship every month. So you can kind of infer from that if they've shipped in February, we'll probably ship in the next few weeks. So then it'll be kind of fully available without any kind of obsolete warnings and package not supported warnings and all those things that are otherwise going to stop you getting past your compliance people.
Yeah, Mark, if I might jump in here, like for people who aren't aware, like a bunch of the sort of main components that we use in ASP.NET Core are not actually part of ASP.NET Core itself. They ship as part of the like Microsoft Extensions set of libraries, and those libraries actually ship on a fairly frequent cadence. Like you're saying that they're now shipping monthly. HybridCache, obviously super important for ASP.NET Core scenarios, but the implementation is not tied to like the ASP.NET Core shared framework. It's a Microsoft Extensions set of libraries that you could use with ASP.NET Core, or you could use elsewhere. So it ships as part of the Microsoft Extensions set of releases.
Yeah, and in fact, the HybridCache, I think it includes kind of down level Net Standard and Net Framework things because some people are kind of still on those things. So the other things that we're also releasing as part of that, we weren't looking to make many changes, but we got some good feedback coming in from the February preview. In particular, we found we got some reports of people not getting things working correctly with value tuples. So it's just to explain, one of the things HybridCache does is deal with all your serialization for you. So obviously you want that serialization to work, and value tuples, they don't actually work with the default JSON serializer because of how it handles fields. So we fixed that, and also because sometimes you do need richer control. You're not limited to using the JSON serializer. That's just the default inbox experience. But if you are using that JSON serializer, we'll now also provide a mechanism to supply the serialization options separately. Although because of how we ship API changes versus implementation, there isn't actually a public API for that. So at the moment, you just kind of need to know which DI keys to poke to make that work. But I'll get all that documented and working, and then we'll get I've logged an issue to get an actual API integrated for that, so that you don't need to go hunting for documentation. So that's the big update there. And there was also another bug to do with just explorations. Not super, it wouldn't affect most people, just a minor thing. So, demo tags. I'm not gonna cover the whole of HybridCache, although I can kind of explain the key things. So I've got here just a standard, very, very basic ASP.NET website. I am not the person you asked to do pretty demos. I'm very much a kind of console kind of person. That's just where all my my UI skills lie. But what we have here is just a very basic website that's got a couple of demo backends, and all it's doing, it really is doing some caching access. So if you were doing this in a few months ago, and you were doing this manually with distributed cache, so this is kind of the API you might be familiar with if you haven't used a hybridcache, then you'd have to get your distributed cache somehow. In this case, we're using DI, and you'd have to know all these APIs. So you've got this get async API to test whether a value exists, and if it does exist, then because you're getting bytes, you need to deserialize your data. Otherwise, if it doesn't exist in the cache yet, you need to go and run your data, serialize it so you can put it into the cache, push it into the cache, do all those things. It's a lot of work. It's a real pain, and there's a lot of ways to kind of trip over your own feet with caching, and in particular, there's also a common problem where cache expires, and all of a sudden you've got you're running happily for half an hour, and then a big cache key falls out the value, and you've got 30 requests, ask for that value at the same time. They all get the value no, so all those 30 requests at once go and get the data, doing the thing 30 times, bring it back, serialize it 30 times, store it into the back end 30 times. You do a lot of work. So that's another one of these big things that HybridCache can fix for you. So it's got something called stampede protection, which basically queues all those, detects that scenario, queues all those things up into one bit of work that it does once, and then they all just get given the same value to avoid doing all that duplicated work. So what does I'll just cover this really, really quickly. So if you're moving over to HybridCache, it actually is great because you get better functionality with less code. So this is the exact same thing, and I've simplified it, and this is the long version of it. Normally you might squeeze it onto like a single line. So all we need to do now is come up with the unique key for our value, including any parameters that we have, and then we just pass in the work to do if we don't have it in cache, just as a callback. And it just from that it does everything. But the new thing, which is the thing we've been waiting on, is this new tagging feature. So if you've used output cache, you'll be familiar with this. So this is when you've got, so there's a problem with caching. Usually when you're invalidating things, it's a lot chunkier than when you're setting values, by which I mean you might set values on a kind of like a per customer or per ID, with these really granular keys, but then when something changes, you don't just have to invalidate that one key where you need to invalidate everything that's kind of impacted by that. So that could be everything in the same region, or everything with the same sales category, or if you think of like Stack Overflow, things like that, everything with the same actual kind of metadata tag. So tagging just allows us to invalidate a whole bunch of things at once by passing in the set of tags, which is just any enumerable set of strings, and then magic happens, and then at some other time we can with our admin API, we can just say remove by tag async. Sorry, my dog's just come in making lots of noise. She's a bulldog, so she's hard to stop. But yeah, you can just use this single API to remove everything at once, and that will impact. You don't need to know how many keys are impacted by that. And the really tricky thing about this was we wanted to do this in a way where it just automatically worked with all your iDistributed cache backends, whether that's Redis or SQL Server or Cosmos DB, MySQL, SQLite, any backend that you're using for caching, it just works. But of course, tagging historically hasn't been a feature of that iDistributed cache backend, and adding a kind of a major feature like that onto all that, it just wouldn't have happened. It would have been something that was only supported on like the two that we touch now, which is likely to be kind of like RESP, so that's kind of Redis and Garnet and maybe SQL Server. That isn't a good outcome. We want it to just work for everyone, so that's why we kind of took a bit more time on tagging and made it work. So I can give a bit of a demo here to show that kind of working in reality. So if I can just find my website, and I just avoid the stream section for a second. Sorry about that. Right. So like I say, I've got this super basic website here, and this is the actual code we're running. So all we're going to do, this underlying data fetch, it just takes 2.5 seconds intentionally to generate a GUID, because GUIDs are hard. So if I refresh this page, it's going to take, there you go, took 2.5 seconds, came up with a GUID. Now if I refresh it, we're going to keep that same GUID for a while, and I'll keep refreshing, and then after a few seconds, I think it's about 10 seconds, you can see that it suddenly takes. Come on, don't crash! Don't crash!
The website
got
like
break. I've got breakpoints and things. Yeah. It's I've got all the debug things enabled. There we go. So it took longer that time. You can see it actually did the work. But the whole point here is all those tricky things like serialization and that, they should, in most cases, just work. If you want to hook in advanced serializers, like Google Protobuf or things like that, that's all possible too. It's just that out of the box, we give you an experience that just does. It should just work for most common scenarios while leaving things flexible for richer things. So the tagging,
I think there are a couple of people in the chat that were asking just like, how does HybridCache relate to some of these backing stores like Redis or SQL and so forth? So just to give people like an overview who might be new to the API, like in ASP.NET Core and in Microsoft extensions, we've had abstractions for distributed cache providers like Redis for a while, where if you wanted to store some data in Redis and get it out again, you could do that. But it was a fairly low level API. If you then also wanted to have like a layered approach where sometimes you cache things in memory, we had abstractions for that. But if you wanted to then fall back to distributed cache, then that was logic that you were writing. The hybrid in HybridCache is handling that all for you, right? Like the L1, L2 caching layers, HybridCache is dealing with that orchestration. And then you plug in whatever provider for your distributed cache that you want, like Redis or SQL or whatever it is. So that's how it relates to Redis. It's not like a Redis implementation itself. It's a framework abstraction on top of caching providers like Redis that makes it easier to do these hybrid multi-layered caching that handles all these more advanced scenarios like dealing with stampede protection, dealing with tagging, and so forth. Yeah.
So as far as the system concerned, we basically just use the distributed cache backend as a basic key value store. And if I do this quickly enough, I should be able to get the value out, and it'll probably be oh no, it's hget all. This is so Redis has got a there you go. So you can see in here there's our that data that we stored along with some other binary goo that you're not really meant to look at. But yeah, it's just basically a key value store. We just throwing blobs into the back end, so it's all completely opaque. So that means we don't need any particular logic in any back end. It's just basically a get. you can think of a distributed cache. It's got a get API that returns bytes and a set API that gives bytes. There's actually one of the other things we did in HybridCache is historically you had to throw byte arrays around, and they're not super efficient because they need to be right sized, and that means you can't pool them. So one of the other things we fixed in all this is there's a whole load of new APIs that allow you to use least buffers for all of the operations in here. And of course, HybridCache knows to check for that, see whether your backend supports it, and kind of prefer that API. So it's all these things that it just by switching over, you get simpler code that's more efficient. It's great. But yeah, the tags. Let me show you the tagging. So here, just for now, I've got a hard-coded couple of tags. So in each of these values, I'm tagging it as general and sales. And then if I go to my admin controller, if I can remember the route, admin, right, there you go. So I've got my route there that invalidates everything to do with general. And now, so what I should be able to do, if I do this quickly enough, is reload this page, and it'll take some time. Quickly run my invalidate thing, and then run this again. And now, because we've invalidated them, it's going to take the 2.5 seconds again and generate a new value. That's because it instantly detects, even though we didn't know the key that was affected, just because we invalidated everything tagged as general, it knew to ignore that value and basically go ahead and kind of run the code again. So that's kind of the gist of the tagging feature. It's intentionally really simple as a kind of a front-facing API. The implementation, like I say, it's really quite tricky because we had to, how do we squeeze that into the kind of the existing backend? Again, that's something we didn't want end users or even the backend distributed cache people to have to deal with. Partly because I actually did the back end for this for output. That's like I say, output cache supports tagging, and I did the Redis implementation for that, and I have regrets because I did it the way you'd normally think of doing it. So, how do you do this kind of tagged thing in Redis? You build this thing collection, and it gets really complicated really quickly because Redis doesn't support that kind of many to one kind of relationship. It's not designed for that. So I wrote an implementation, and this is better. This is how I'd do it if I was doing it again from scratch. So there you go. That's the kind of the tagging feature. It works. It's great. Please use it and let us know.
There was a question from I think it's Rizwan Tayyab about the tag cache logic. Yeah, this one. About how this is being handled under the covers, that there's some additional metadata to invalidate it. I don't know if you want to speak to that at all, Mark?
Yeah, I can do. So basically, so what we're doing is we're making use of we're using the distributed cache to store some additional values that represent the tags. So the first thing, in fact, you can see in the hgetall here, is, so this is the data that actually went down to the back end. This bit we're actually storing the tags as part of basically a frame header on the actual payload. So in each value, we don't just, so if you're just doing this manually with the distributed cache, you would just store here's the value. There's a few problems with that. It doesn't allow you to do some scenarios that kind of span all the distributed caches. So what we're doing instead is we're extending that and storing a slightly wider payload that includes a few other things, such as the tags and, in fact, the key that it was stored against. And there's a reason for that. Is we've actually seen some weird scenarios, incredibly rare, where some cache backends, for whatever reason, like it could be like what's called a confusion attack. So imagine you were using a database as the backend, and somebody had set it up in case sensitive mode. Case insensitive mode, and for your purposes, the case matters, and I don't know, because it's base 64 keys or something. So you thought you were accessing key capital A BC, but some nefarious actor finds a way to get your website to query lowercase ABC and fetch the existing value with uppercase BC because the database is in kind of case insensitive mode. So by storing kind of the additional data in here, we can also do things like strong testing against the value that came out. Is this actually the value that you requested? Are we absolutely sure on that? And we would log and discard values that came back and kind of report that on your usual reporting channels, just so that we can have defense in depth against kind of all of those things for free. But what we're doing is, because we're storing all those tags, the other thing we're storing is, you can see here at the top, we've added this extra key, which is the so that's the Microsoft HybridCache tags key prefix. We've got a kind of a namespace of tags. So that's the general key. So basically, we've invented a key for a tag, so that we can actually detect. We can store the expiration down in the data in the back end. So that, imagine you've got a cold start scenario. When we turn on this system, and we know that we need some values, even if that value hasn't yet expired because it's in like Redis or SQL Server or whatever, when we go down, we can fetch it, and from that, even if they passed in different tags this time in the query, we can look at it and say, when we stored this, we knew it had the general tag and the sales tag. Do we know about those tags yet? If we don't, we can go down and query down against the key in the database. What's the expected? When was that last invalidated? Because if the value that was last invalidated is after when we actually stored this, which there's some, you can't see them because it's binary values, so they're not showing. We can kind of compare that value when we're fetching it out, and then decide then and there. Actually, even though it says cold start and we knew nothing, we can now decide to throw away to treat that as invalidated, even though we didn't actually see it happen. We know it happened when we were offline. So yeah, there's we're basically just using some extra values in the back end to manage all that for us. And the only downside of this is that it does mean that the payload that we're storing here is slightly larger, but it's in real terms, if you're caching something, it's only like an extra 20 bytes plus the size of your tag and key, so it's not going to matter in any scenario where. And if you're familiar with it, most of these things are going to be out of process. They're going to be involve kind of a network hop, so it's going to fit inside the same packet anyway. So you're not gaining or losing any efficiency by not storing it. So yeah, that's how the implementation works. It's all on GitHub there. This
Cool.
part is actually implementation specific. So Fusion Cache also have an implementation of the HybridCache API, which is just an abstraction. How they choose to do it is entirely up to them. So
I think we have the Fusion Cache author on the chat with us today. Actually, he's
yep.
Hi, Jody.
So yeah. Yeah. There were some other questions. I don't know if we should jump to this one here. Let me see. This one was in 2. What is the underlying logic for clearing the cache by tag? I saw somewhere it keeps the cache, but just some of the metadata to invalidate. I think you just covered this.
Yeah, that covers that. Yeah. I think.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Oh, wait. Sorry, this was the one I meant to do. The question is when you. Sorry. Okay. When you have event consumers, several consumers of the same type that will revoke the cache key, will HybridCache have a mechanism to revoke the cache key in memory for the consumer that were not first?
I can come on to that. Yeah, that's a great question, and I can come on to it. So that's cool. So that kind of covers what we're releasing in the GA part now. So what you're covering there really comes onto the futures, which is great because that means I can come back to my slideshow and click the button here. So we've done our demo there. So yeah, futures. So alliteration is hard. So it's not one and done. We're hoping to keep making improvements. So we're going to be bigger, better, and be gooder. One of the things we're looking at in the very short term is zero allocation keys. So one of the problems at the moment in that code, if I come back to, actually, no, there's this key. I go to the trouble of writing slides and then I don't follow them. So let's do them. Here we go. So zero allocation keys. So this is very similar to the code we just had. And we can see here that we're doing this get or create async, and we're passing in our unique key to the cache entry and our callback. So there's an open question here. What is that thing? And you might think, well, it's a string. Yeah, we're interpolating it, but it's a string. But it doesn't have to be. So one of the things we're looking to do in .NET 10 is actually exploit some new APIs to do this so that in the cache hit case, and we expect our cache hits to be a high frequency, otherwise what's the point of caching? So in our cache hits, we don't want to pay to allocate this on the heap every time just for the garbage collector to come and get it. So I said that doesn't have to be a string. If I find my browser tab somewhere, I got a demo of this in SharpLab, which is always a great tool. Yeah. So I've got this is a minimal example. So I've got my minimal hybrid cache here. I'm doing exactly the same thing with this get async passing in here. And you might think that's going to be calling our string code, but it isn't. That's leftover rubbish. It's actually calling this version. So from C#6, there's this concept of interpolated string handlers, where this type of code, instead of using something like string builder or string concat, actually uses this duck typed API. There's a whole pattern for it. There's a great learn article on this about how to write your own, but we don't necessarily want to write our own. Where basically, if you write an API that matches this kind of similar pattern, in fact, Roslyn even prefers this pattern over the string version by default. So you can see here I've got a version that takes a ref default interpolated string handler. Now that could actually be a custom one. We could create something called key builder, but I'm just using default interpolated string handler to prove the point. And behind the scenes, it doesn't actually just allocate a string. It does all the work it would do normally to kind of prepare this value with all the different parts. So it's going to add in our variables and the literals. But it's not creating a string, it's just packing them into a pre-sized buffer that it kind of computes. And then it passes in our ref key here. And our code needs to do some work to get those values out. The only problem is, at the moment, those APIs aren't readily available. So there's been a change merged. I don't think it made it into preview 1, but it is merged. So I think it'll be in preview 2. That basically makes it possible to access those values directly without all these kind of reflection hacks, so that you can say key.text or key.clear to get the values out. And then you might be thinking, okay, well so that allows me to access just the span of, I haven't created a string, I've just got the character data. Then you actually need to do something useful with that. So memory cache, I think it was in .NET 9 they added this concept of alt lookups on collections, in particular dictionaries, that allows you to basically say, I know this is actually a dictionary that takes a string, but wouldn't it be nice if you could give me an accessor that takes a read-only span of char? So that exists in .NET 9, but the idea here is that we're extending the memory cache API. This is also merged, but I think preview 2 of .NET 10. Memory cache now has an API that allows you to get values by passing in a read-only span of char rather than a string.
Wow.
So by
That's crazy.
putting all those bits together, it means that we should be able to do zero allocation hits, and you didn't have to change any of the code. So our existing code, even though it was async and we're doing await and all those things, all we need to do is when this API comes out, which recompile it, it'll pick up the new bits, use the new magic. If you are using a string because you've calculated it in some method, that will still work as well, but it'll just start doing the more efficient thing
It took me a second to understand what I got a dish was all about, but I guess that's the acronym for default interpolated string.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
There you go.
It's a really cool example of like the types of things that are possible when you have, coordination and between, frameworks to compiler and runtime and all the people working together to be like, how can we make this efficient but yet still general, not like special case.
It's funny because I remember reading the I don't know, the release notes on that feature, and I was like, this seems neat. I guess somebody cares about it. I don't know why. And then it's great to see the actual use case. So we got a question on whether that would work with AOT.
Whether which would work with AOT?
Default interpolated string handler.
Absolutely, that's perfectly precompiled code. There's nothing dynamic there whatsoever.
Right.
We can see it. It's just calling. We could write that code ourselves. That would do exactly the same thing. If default interpolated string handler actually is what drives most of the interpolated string stuff now. It's kind of, as the name suggests, the default. It's just that normally, so in fact, let's just comment out this. I'll just rename this method, and you'll see what changes. So now, exactly the same code happens here. It still uses default interpolated string handler. It's just that Roslyn now calls toString and clear.
Oh,
here. So that's how interpolated strings normally work now in .NET. So it does all that work. And then just calls this toString and clear. The clear part of that is it recycling the pool buffer. So yeah, we're not actually adding a lot here. We're just making some really, really minor tweaks for some huge improvements. And that's actually was in part driven from some of our internal potential consumers who were kind of concerned about kind of the overhead of kind of object keys when they wanted essentially value tuple keys. So that's read-only span char is about as close as we can probably get, and it covers most scenarios. And it also means we don't then need to think about, well, okay, you've passed us in a value tuple. How do we generate a distributed cache key from that? So it keeps things really, really simple if we can use a string-like type end-to-end.
That's a good thing to bring up there, is that, you're talking about internal users, and that's a really nice thing. Like we've got teams at Microsoft using .NET at like large scale, and it has real business and performance impact on them, right? So it's great to for people watching this, those that are not working at Microsoft, you're benefiting off of the internal kind of like pressure and business case there, right?
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool. So what else are we looking to do? So that's almost done. We're just waiting on the as soon as the preview 2 gets in, I'll make the changes in extensions. That'll be shipped, I hope, for essentially preview 3. So then some of the other things we would like to do ASAP. This is, I think, is what the question earlier was asking about. So this is active cache invalidation and synchronization between multiple nodes. The short version. So at the moment, we don't have an API that allows, say, a SQL server or a Redis server, if you've got a multi-node environment, to say this cache became invalidated because we prematurely assigned a new value rather than it just falling out of cache. That is a gap. It's one we desperately want to clear. The trick is there, we need to think of the right API to do that. That doesn't need to be particularly hard. In fact, the more I think about it, the simpler we keep that, the better. It could even just be as simple as something like this, where we got some new interface that is a specialization of distributed cache that we could then type test for. That is basically something changed at the back end, and here's the key that changed. It could be as simple as that. We might make it a bit more nuanced. Try and avoid some allocations. Have a bit more granularity. I don't think we should overthink it, but we just need to get that in and get some of the back end implementations implementing it. Unfortunately, that'll be one that doesn't come for free. because it will actually need the distributed cache implementations to hook in however it is that they best do that. So in Redis land, for example, that might be active pub sub, or it might be what's called key space notifications. There's a couple of ways of doing that, just making that work. So what else is going on? So the good news is there's some really active discussion on the .NET extensions GitHub. So a lot of the things below this are kind of coming out of active discussions on that. So there's been a really good conversation about sliding exploration. Originally, we kind of haven't provided sliding exploration because it's complex, and most people it's very easy to use wrong and not understand the implications of the kind of this sliding thing. But after some active discussion, I think we've figured out a way where we can make that work very effectively. So hopefully we should get that. We should be able. I'll think about it a bit more. Make sure we're not rushing into painting ourselves into a corner, but hopefully get that in. There's some other features that aren't currently working quite as some people would want. So context dependent callbacks. What do I mean by that? Say you've got some ambient state that's kind of associated with your I would say thread, but whatever execution context, task context, whatever you want to think of it. So that could be essentially your kind of current web request. At the moment, because of how that stampede protection works, and the way we do that preemptively, because by definition, when the first request comes in, you don't know if there's going to be 6 other requests asking for it. We essentially spawn the actual background work off onto another worker on the task thread pool, and at the moment that isn't currently respecting that kind of ambient state. So and that's probably a good thing in most ways, because this is kind of a cache callback. But some people would prefer that just worked seamlessly and the ambient state just worked end to end. So I'll try and see if I can figure out a good way to get that working. And the other big one, and again, this has come from both public consumers and our internal consumers, is better configuration around kind of keyed DI, so that they can configure either multiple hybrid caches with kind of different configurations, or better control of where's it getting that iDistributed cache from. Is that just the default global iDistributed cache that we logged in the DI container, or is there a separate distributed cache that is specific to the use of hybrid cache? So there's hopefully some better configuration APIs kind of coming up, and there's a couple of other kind of minor things that I say minor. I mean that in the sense that they're relatively small and don't kind of change the design, but for the people who want them, they're kind of quite high priorities. Like the ability to test whether a value exists without jumping through a lot of hoops. You can do that in hybrid cache at the moment, but you need to know the correct incantation to get that working. So hopefully we'll make that simpler for people. Synchronous API support, I don't know. That's a tricky one because it's a complex area to add. The whole synchronous asynchronous conversation. I need to think very carefully about that. I'm very cautious of kind of locking up threads, particularly in the stampede scenario. That seems like a very good way to cause big problems. So I'll keep thinking about that. But yeah, so that's the key point I'm trying to raise in all this is hybrid cache isn't done. We've got loads of things that we want to add. Probably more things than we've got time for, and I know I overpromised for .NET 9, and then we're shipping late, so it's always the case of we'll prioritize things, see what we can do appropriately, juggling that with all the other things we need to get on, and try and bear in mind as much as we can the kind of the feedback we get from the community in terms of what features they need, what's the best bang for the buck. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going.
Cool. So stable release coming any day now. Sometime this month.
Yes.
We'll expect the 9.3 release. I know there are a bunch of questions, John. Do we want to try and get some of those in to see?
Okay. So one of the most recent one. Have you thought about get async or set async versus get or set?
So that's the thing I was just saying. That's in theory. It's the stampede that makes me very, very nervous about that.
Okay.
If it was a single, well, no, I guess it's the same problem even if you don't have stampede. It's a complex one. I don't want to kind of load up a shotgun and hand it for people to blow their own feet off. It's one of those things that I think the better thing to do there is to try and convince people that this isn't the right approach to use.
Right.
I think maybe this is probably a communication, a better handle through communication, and because this is kind of like the perfect candidate for async, where you've got something that you know could involve multiple things, because you could have the asynchronous heading off to the L2 cache. You could have the asynchronous, you need to fetch some expensive data. You could have all this. It's so perfect for async that then saying, oh, we'll wrap a synchronous wrapper around it. It just seems like we're losing a lot there and causing a lot of potential problems. I guess I want to see the kind of the conversation that as to how do we make this kind of a necessary feature other than one that we're just kind of talking about. So if you've got that must-have scenario, please talk to me. That's probably the best way to make it happen is to explain to me how we can do this safely and how it's necessary.
Well, so speaking of which, can you show do you on the repo, are you having people engage via issues, discussions? What's
Yeah. So the repo here is it's just .NET extensions. So I'll bring these up here.
Cool.
So it's really easy to find, and it's if you just include HybridCache in there, then it'll automatically should get routed to myself, and we can kind of look at that.
Cool.
I think I saw a question, Mark, about like if you really only want currently in-memory caching, but you want to sort of insulate yourself from the future saying, oh, but now I want to do the HybridCache thing. Is there a way to use HybridCache so that you only basically use it as an in-memory cache and then you turn on the distributed cache part later?
That's absolutely supported, and that in fact is the default. If there is no distributed cache detected, it will just work as it'll just use the L1, by which I mean the memory, whatever memory cache is present. It'll still give you the stampede protection, and when these .NET 10 bits land, it'll still give you the allocation free hits. So you get all the goodness. It's just that it never has to. Actually, that's not quite true. It will still do serialization in many cases. That's because to avoid surprises, if you're migrating from distributed cache, historically, because you would have been deserializing every time, you would have got a different instance of the object graph back each time. And if people are going to be mutating that, it could be really, really dangerous if we suddenly handed them back the same graph each time. There is a way in HybridCache, if you know that your data is safe to share, you can kind of turn that on so that instead of serial, even if you're just using in memory, rather than it at all involving a serializer, you can say, I know what I'm doing. Just store the object graph. Just hand me back the object graph. You're probably using things like immutable array and things like that, or a nice sealed POCO type with initialize init only things. If you're using that, then that HybridCache will detect that scenario and will work even more efficiently. So yeah, there's all these weird niche cases that you don't normally want to have to think about. HybridCache can do them once and it just works.
Okay.
Do you expect any of the like the features that you talked about? Like extension ships, like we talked about earlier, every month. But there's some things that you were talking about that were specific to .NET 10 that required like .NET 10 new APIs. Are you expecting any updates to HybridCache on the like 9x train, like the non 10 support between now and November? Or at this point, are you mostly thinking it's a .NET 10 tied release?
It really depends. So the only reason I mentioned .NET 10 for them is because it requires features that are .NET 10 specific. So the default interpolated string handler, at the moment that change has only been applied to .NET 10, and because of how we tend to there's a very, very high bar for backporting API changes, like adding a new method onto existing types. I doubt those methods are going to get backported to .NET 9, and I can't backport it any further than that because it doesn't exist in memory cache. The memory cache API doesn't. In fact, the whole alt lookup thing doesn't exist before .NET 9. So the absolute earliest I can backport that would be .NET 9. All these other features, yeah, I would absolutely assume that those are going to continue to support earlier TFMs. I need to think a bit carefully about what TFMs that means. It might be that the .NET 10 branch supports because .NET 10 is an LTS. Is it like, do we support .NET 10 and Net Standard and NetFX? I need to think about whether we also support .NET 10 and .NET 8 as the previous LTS. That's mostly an internal conversation, just in terms of how many LTSs we need to support. But yeah, as long as the feature can support work, because the other tricky thing is, again, it's adding APIs is the trick. Am I allowed to add backport the API changes? It's a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah. We're pretty conservative on backporting API feature like functional level stuff because I mean, we want to make sure that we don't regress anything, that the people up to like installing patch releases, that they can feel confident that they can get security fixes without something else coming along that accidentally, disrupts their ability to take those those servicing fixes. Yeah. Cool. That's great. Awesome.
I had two real quick, simple, fun questions for you here at the end. One was they like your PowerShell UI. How'd you get it set up like that?
Hang on, the PowerShell, that is PoshGit. In fact, that's Nick. It's Nick Craver's got I'll find the link. He's got basically a setup of some scripts that you can just apply, and it does all the things. I'll dig that out and send it to Jon. You can just search Nick Craver's PoshGit setup. It'll probably find it.
I've been using, there's a Nick Craver theme for Oh My Posh, which
Oh My Posh, that's it. Yeah,
cool.
That's the same
okay, one other one, just an off topic here, but what are your thoughts on, is like Redis? You showed Garnet. Are there, as far as like anything else similar that you keep an eye on?
In terms of what? Sorry, I don't understand the question.
Just like back-end caching stores, like like I know of Redis and Garnet. Those are the two that are like that.
So back-end caches, I know there's a whole bunch. I know Cosmos have got one that is directly supported, and I think there's a few. Hang on. There's certainly one for either SQLite or MySQL. It could be both. I did actually have a list when I did the initial prep work for HybridCache. I had a list of about 6 or 7. There's a whole bunch. There's a NeoSmart have a SQLite one. Okay. There's a whole bunch. Okay. And in fact, I wrote one. Garnet has a kind of a core part called Savorite. Where you can basically bypass all of the Redis bits and just go directly to the back-end storage. I've got a version of that somewhere, which is ridiculously fast because it doesn't, you're not even, they're only good for local same machine comms. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of distributed caches around.
Which key value store should you use? Well, of course, Mark, the one I wrote.
Right.
I'm sure I meant to say Azure Redis, right, or something.
There you go. Awesome. Okay, well, that was amazing. Great to see the stuff that's currently shipping, and then looking forward to the 9.3 release and futures and stuff. A lot of great questions today too. Cool. So
awesome. Thank you, Mark. It was great.
All right. Okay. I think it's time for the goodbye music. Thanks a bunch.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time.